Welcome, everybody. We're here for a new episode from the gutter to greatness with my guest who just disappeared for a second in the camera, but that's okay. We're excited to have her here. This episode is called "Only God Can Judge Me." This woman has an amazing story of gutter to greatness again, where she's taken all kinds of lumps and bruises, but continues to shine as the star that she is. She's a brilliant legal mind. She is someone that we definitely want to understand and hear her story, and can't wait to she tells it to us. So we have with us today Leticia Astacio. So Leticia, can you kind of tell us what do you do? And why should anyone care?
Okay, well, excuse me, I'm a little bit sick. I am currently a defense attorney in Rochester, New York. I know that you're familiar with Rochester, but for those of the community that are not aware, Rochester is a small city with a pretty high percentage of people of color, and the majority of them live in pretty extreme poverty. We have a failing school district. We have a pretty dismal situation for the people of color in this society. So being a defense attorney here means dealing primarily with people of color who have had a difficult start and maybe don't have the resources or are struggling with mental health issues and poverty and lack of parents in the home. It can be a very difficult position, and I interact with a lot of people who are struggling on a regular and consistent basis. So I think that I have some insight that is helpful to people dealing with things that help them kind of transition through some of the struggles that they may deal with either with criminal law or family law. And I think that's incredibly important for our society. But furthermore, that has been my own situation. Growing up in the city of Rochester, my parents dealt with substance abuse issues. I dealt with poverty. I was the first in my family to graduate from high school. And I did that after I had a child of my own, and then went to college, ultimately went to law school, became a prosecutor, became a judge, became a private attorney before being a judge. It's just been a long road. And I think that ultimately, irrespective of what anyone else would say, I've been pretty successful along the way. And if I'm honest, it's not always very easy for people to make that transition out of poverty and, I guess, the gutter, as you would call it, to greatness and affluence and being an educated person. It's a very different role. Additionally, most people say the hardest part of being in like the boys club is getting in. And I definitely think that's true. I got in when no one wanted me, got kicked out, and then kicked the door down and came back in again. So I think that,
and that's we got to get to all that. So slow down, Skipper. Like, whoa, like
you said, why should you care? I'm like, let me show you something.
Okay, so I get you, and y'all, she's using all her big words and her lawyer speak like I'm a little nervous, like she's gonna sue me or something. So and I know that I want to dig into it, and I know a little bit of the story. We've had some conversations in the past, and I think what is interesting also, as I want people to understand, is like you said, exactly where you came from. So you started on, and correct me if I'm wrong, but did you grow up on the west side of Rochester?
Northwest. I grew up, I don't want any West Siders to come for me. I was not 14619. I grew up on the Northwest. I was always 14610. So I grew up off of Lyle Avenue on Sherman Street. Arthur Shawcross actually killed my neighbor because I was like on Hooker's Row. So yeah, that's right. I grew up.
And that's acceptable. That still gets lumped into the West Side, not completely West Side.
No, the real West Siders wouldn't have me.
No, they wouldn't. I'm from the East Side, so but that area though, Sherman Street, has always been ridden with crime, with drugs, with prostitution. So that area was definitely rough growing up. And so, and I heard you say you were the first person in your family to graduate high school, and I think you did all of this rather, like, I know that you became a judge rather young, and it was rather quickly. What was some of that process like? Like, talk to us a little bit about how you grew up, and not even getting to some of the other things, but just what was the mindset? What was the mentality? What was it like for you growing up as little Leticia on Sherman Street?
It was difficult. My parents were wonderful people, are wonderful people, and I think that they did an amazing job, but they did the best that they could with the resources they had, right? And they didn't have any resources and they didn't know how to parent. They were surviving. So life was difficult for me. It was not as difficult as it is for a lot of people in Rochester, because my parents always stressed the importance of education, and it didn't matter what they were going through in their personal life. It never was a reason for me to not do what they expected. My
Right.
parents could be completely strung out on drugs. It didn't matter. I needed to get up and go to school. And they would check. They would make sure. They were
Right.
parents to the best of their ability, and they made sure of certain things. So like growing up on Sherman Street, I wasn't allowed to have friends. It's a rough neighborhood. And my parents were like, those people aren't going where you're going. We don't want you to be interacting with people that change the trajectory of where you're going. So they didn't really let me outside of the fence. I couldn't interact with anyone. And I went to an urban suburban school. I went to school in Irondequoit.
Mm-hmm.
So I would have to get up at like 5 o'clock in the morning to catch the bus downtown to get a transfer to go to Irondequoit to catch another bus to get to school. So I knew all of the prostitutes because they were the only people that were up when I was up walking to the bus.
So what? Give me one of their names. Give me Trixie's name. What was Trixie?
There was one, Roxanne was her name. She was my absolute favorite.
Why was she your favorite?
She was just so nice. She would talk to me and she would walk me to the bus stop and she would wait with me. And so this is how I got in trouble for like the first time, right? I'm like in first grade and I'm walking to the bus stop with Roxanne because she's my girl. And we're talking about life. And my mom, who doesn't let me out of the gate ever, is like, what are you doing? Because I'm walking down the street with a prostitute who's like working, she's flashing people in the middle of walking to the bus.
She's like, hey, Leticia, I'm going to get you there safely. And then turns around and says,
she's like, I'm working, but let's go. She was super nice. So yeah, so that was my first experience with like, no, the neighborhood.
But you know what? I think did that frame. So and what's interesting to me is like, I like to deal in experiences at times. And so it sounds like that experience may have even been something that framed why you do what you do and why you wanted to be who you are. Do you have any insight on that? Do you think that type of experience, those experiences did have any push or pull on what you do?
It's funny. I never even thought about the correlation, but I'm sure it did. I've always knew that I was interested in defense work because I'm a fairly non-judgmental person. I think that most times if a person is accused of a crime, you can see why they might have done it. You can always find a reason that activity made sense. So I've always struggled with that. I've had family members accused of crimes. I've had loved ones incarcerated, and I've always felt like it was kind of unfair and I didn't think it was appropriate. But you're right, from a very early age, I was only 5-6 years old. It was very clear you're not supposed to do this, but I liked that person. I didn't see them as a bad person that deserved to be punished. Or, you know what I mean? I felt like she had a job. Everybody's got to have a job, unfortunately.
Not definitely. And then so you got through and you graduate. Did you graduate high school in Irondequoit?
I did. I got pregnant with my daughter when I was in 11th grade. And I actually, at that point, me and my parents were in a very different place. I was on the brink of dropping out of high school. I wasn't living at home. I moved out when I was like 14 and I was living with my boyfriend and I got pregnant. And when it was very funny. I was working at Arby's. I made $4.15 an hour. I was barely going to school. And he sold crack. And that was like, yes, we're going to make it. This is like everybody's dream. We're going to be fine. I'm going to live high on the hog. And then I got pregnant and I was like, oh my God, I can't do any of this anymore. I immediately changed everything, started going to school, finished school, went to college, because when it was just me, it was like, whatever, I can make crazy decisions. But when I knew that I was going to be responsible for another person, it was like, I can't take care of a person and move like this. You know what I mean?
Right.
So I had to change everything. So I did graduate from high school, but I wasn't going to. I was going to totally fail out.
And so what were some of those thoughts, mindsets, or struggles that you remember going through? Like, because the gutter, to as I explain on here all the time, is that it's not always about where you live or where you're from. And sometimes it's where you're at, and it's your mindset. And your mindset is one that is stuck in a place that it's hard to get out of. And then you shift into a different mindset, which creates an opportunity to rise to greatness. And so what was that mindset like when you were young? Because the person that I've gotten to know here is someone who is extremely bright. I'd say brighter than a lot of folks that you probably come in contact with, and just have a very strong ability. But it sounds like you were on the verge of throwing that away. What were the struggles, or what were the thoughts that made you want to even potentially throw away your ability and your talent?
I think that life can be overwhelming when you are dealing with a lot of external stressors as opposed to just like being a normal kid. And it was like, I don't want to do this. I went to a predominantly white school in a very racist neighborhood that was incredibly difficult to get to. My teachers were very frustrated with me because I was perpetually homeless and they didn't have anyone they could tell on me, right? I live alone. So yes, I'm 14, but I came to school late today because I caught 4 buses and I slept at my boyfriend's last night, and you're lucky I came. Who are you going to tell? Are you going to tell my mom? She's not going to call. I don't live with her. So how are you going to penalize me? In high school, that became an issue. My principal actually used to tell me, you're going to be the biggest attorney ever because like nobody can do anything to you. You can argue your way out of anything. I remember when I got pregnant with Jaya, I told you I hadn't been going to school. I came back to school and I was like, all right, I'm going to stop doing that now. I'm not going to drop out anymore. I'm going to go to school now. And they were like, okay, you've got in-school suspension for the next 6 months. And I was like, I'm not going to do that. If you're going to give me in-school suspension, I'm going to go back home and I'm not coming back to school. If I'm coming back to school, it's so I can do my work. I'm not going to be penalized. That's dumb. Right. And we worked it out so that instead of in-school suspension, they would let me go to class and then I was going to fail because I hadn't gone to gym. So for 6 periods, they gave me ISS and I went and did gym so that I could pass anyway. But we negotiated a disposition because I wasn't going to do it. I was like, I'm not going to forget it. I'll fail. I'll get a GED. And I guess I've always kind of been that person where if things don't make sense, I'm not going to do them. I'm going to do them my way. And I think that's just been, when I'm sure of myself about something, I'm sure my parents kind of taught me that to know what you know. Right. And when I know what I know, you're not going to convince me of anything else. So yes, my mindset changed dramatically. And then once I know something, you're going to know it too. And I'm going to convince you. I'm going to convince you. Right.
I've heard and I've seen that. So, and what is the thought that comes to my mind is that you got it together, a gear or a light switch came on, and then like you were almost became like an unstoppable force where you made your mind up, like you said, and you were going to push through no matter what. So then you went, where did you attend college at and law school and those pieces? And how did all that happen as you had a child too? Because this show is all about, hopefully that there's people who can identify with the stories that they hear and that they can realize if this person is able to pull themselves up by them bootstraps and do something differently, I can do it too. Right. So, and so what was that kind of journey after you graduated high school, you just had a baby, and that is we know it's hard to have kids, and especially at a young age. So what was next? What did that look like?
I finished high school and I hadn't been on the college track at all, right? Like I said, I hadn't been going to school. I was planning to drop out. So I hadn't been prepared. I just went to MCC, but I was super focused. So I actually finished MCC in a year. So I graduated from high school in 99. Then I graduated from MCC in 2000. Then I went to UB. And I stayed there. I graduated from UB in 2002 with my associates, and then I graduated in 2006 with my master's and my JD in law. I got admitted to the bar in 2007, and I started working in the district attorney's office. In law school, I didn't get married, but I met who became my husband later and decided to have a baby because school's not hard enough unless I have a child. And so I had a baby, but I passed the bar the first time, got out, came back to Rochester and started working. I worked at Lonnie, which is a not-for-profit, and then I worked at the DA's office. And it was just a really whirlwind, crazy experience because that's not the life I had ever saw for myself. You know what I mean? As soon as I got pregnant, though, I knew my parents became drug users from being drug dealers. And I think I idolized that lifestyle because of that. I didn't want her to have the same lifestyle as me. So as soon as I got pregnant, I was like, oh, I don't want to do anything that I'm doing. I'm doing what I know to do. This isn't what I want for my child, though. You know what I mean?
Right. And so where was where was your daughter? It was your daughter, right? The first child was a daughter?
Yes. So my family helped me immensely.
Right.
When I went to MCC, I was at MCC from 7 o'clock in the morning until 3:30 in the afternoon. I would come home, feed her, and then go to work from 5:30 until 10:30. I was not hardly a parent, but my mom owns a daycare. Both of my little sisters own daycares. My family has a lot of women. And so there was a ton of support, and that was incredibly helpful and instrumental. I think that it's sad that you see less family support now because we've always relied on that for success in our culture and in our community. You know what I mean? Being able to rely on other
Right.
people to help us. And I think that as that falls by the wayside, people have less opportunity for success, unfortunately. I never would have made it without my family. And
No,
I don't just mean that when my daughter was little. I mean, time and time and time again, I never would have made it without my family.